I have always enjoyed outdoor adventures. Hiking, climbing, and even exploring caves were never a problem for me. I loved the feeling of discovering hidden places, far from the chaos of the city. But there is one cave in particular that changed my perspective on this type of adventure. What I found inside still unsettles me, and honestly, I wish I had never entered. It was a Saturday afternoon, and my friend Andre and I decided to explore a cave he had discovered while hiking the previous week. He said it was small, but there was something mysterious about the atmosphere of the place. "It will be quick," he assured, as we packed our backpacks with flashlights, ropes, and basic supplies. The trail to the cave was already challenging. We passed through a narrow path surrounded by tall trees where sunlight barely reached the ground. After almost an hour of walking, we arrived at the entrance of the cave. It was larger than I had imagined, with a dark opening that seemed to swallow all the light around. We entered with our flashlights in hand, illuminating the path ahead of us. The air inside the cave was cold and damp, with a metallic smell I couldn't identify. The walls were covered in moss, and small drops of water fell from the ceiling, creating a rhythmic sound that echoed throughout the space. Andre seemed excited, exploring every corner. "Look at this," he said, pointing to strange marks on the walls. They were symbols we didn't recognize, like hand-drawn designs, but with disjointed and disturbing shapes. Despite my curiosity, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. With every step, it felt like something was guiding us, but when I turned around, I only saw darkness behind us. After walking for about 20 minutes, we reached a larger room where the ceiling was higher and the floor seemed different, almost as if it had been leveled by someone. In the center of the room, there was an object that made us stop immediately. An old wooden chair, placed perfectly in the middle of the space. Who would put this here? I wondered, feeling a chill run down my spine. Before Andre could respond, we heard a sound coming from the tunnel we had entered. It was a low scratching, followed by light footsteps, but clearly human. "Is there someone here?" Andre commented, but his voice echoed unanswered. I shone the flashlight at the tunnel entrance, but I saw nothing. However, the sound continued, now closer. Suddenly, Andre's flashlight began to flicker, casting grotesque shadows on the cave walls. When he tried to adjust it, it went out completely, leaving only my flashlight as our sole source of light. "We need to get out of here," I said, trying to control the panic. As we started to head back, we heard something that made us stop. It was a low, muffled laugh coming from somewhere behind us. It wasn't natural. It sounded distorted, as if someone were trying to imitate a human laugh. We ran toward the entrance, but the cave seemed larger now, as if the tunnel had stretched. The sound of footsteps and laughter continued to follow us, and with each moment, it seemed closer. Then my flashlight failed. We were plunged into total darkness, with only the sounds to guide us. After a few minutes of absolute panic, I managed to find an exit. The fresh air of the forest had never felt so good. We ran back to the trail, not looking back, and only stopped when we reached the start of the path. Andre tried to talk about what happened, but neither of us could explain. Something was wrong in that cave, and the feeling of being watched did not fade even after we were far from the place. A week later, he called me saying he was reviewing the photos he took in the cave. In one of them, taken in the room with the chair, there was something in the corner. A dark silhouette with hidden eyes watching us. I never returned to the cave, and even today, I avoid places that remind me of it. Some mysteries should remain buried in the dark. Report 2. I have never been a fan of caves. Even though I enjoy outdoor adventures, I've always found these places to be claustrophobic and dangerous. But a few months ago, a group of friends managed to convince me to explore an isolated cave they found on a trail. What seemed like just another evening of exploration turned into a nightmare I will never forget. It was a Saturday afternoon when we set out. I, Felipe, and Amanda walked for almost an hour until we reached the cave entrance. The area was surrounded by dense trees, and the trail was so rarely used that it almost seemed hidden. The entrance was a narrow crack in the rock, barely visible among the vegetation. Felipe had read about the cave on an online forum and was excited. Amanda was calmer but still seemed curious. "They say no one has explored this place in decades," Felipe commented as he adjusted the headlamp strapped to his head. I felt uncomfortable. There was something about the atmosphere that seemed off. We entered slowly, with our lanterns illuminating the tight tunnel ahead of us. The temperature dropped quickly, and the sound of our footsteps echoed strangely off the walls. The smell was strong and metallic, something we couldn't identify. The cave walls were covered with marks, as if someone had scratched the rock hard. "Are these marks natural?" Amanda asked, her voice hesitant. Felipe, always the skeptic, replied, "Probably. Or someone who passed through here was bored." As we walked, I began to feel that the tunnel was getting narrower. With each step, it felt like the shadows around us were moving strangely, as if they were more than just the reflection of our lanterns. We reached a larger room where the ceiling was high and rock formations hung down like giant teeth. In the center of the space was a pile of stones carefully stacked. "This doesn't look natural," Amanda murmured, staring at the stones. Felipe moved to examine, but before we could touch them, we heard a sound. It was a low, irregular noise, like something being dragged. "Did you hear that?" I asked, trying to hide the fear. The sound was coming from one of the smaller tunnels that branched off from that room. When we illuminated the passage, we saw what appeared to be a shadow moving slowly. "It must be an animal," Felipe said, though his voice sounded uncertain. As we tried to decide what to do, the sound began to grow louder. It was as if something was coming toward us, but we couldn't clearly see what it was. "Let's get out of here," Amanda suggested, starting to back away. Before we could move, the lanterns began to flicker, leaving the room in dim light. It was then that I noticed something on the walls, fresh marks like recent scratches that hadn't been there before. The sound of dragging began to echo around us, now closer, as if it were coming from all directions. Suddenly, a pile of stones in the center of the room collapsed, scattering the stones across the floor. Something moved among the shadows, too fast for us to see. We ran back through the tunnel, but the path seemed longer than before. The sound of something following us continued, now accompanied by a low, unintelligible whisper. When we finally reached the exit, the fresh air was like a burst. We stopped to catch our breath, but looking back, I saw something in the darkness. A silhouette stood at the entrance of the cave, motionless, watching us. Amanda and Felipe saw it too, but no one said a word. We just returned to the trail and left as quickly as possible. Since that night, none of us wanted to talk about what happened, and I have never returned to the cave. Some things are meant to stay in the dark, away from curious people like us. Report 3. I have always been skeptical about stories of haunted places. To me, they were just tales to scare children or keep curious people away from abandoned properties. But a few months ago, something happened to me that made me completely reconsider. The house was at the end of a dirt road, surrounded by trees. I had never noticed it before, but on a cold night, a friend challenged me to go in and explore. I accepted, not imagining that this decision would change my life. The house was large, 2 stories tall, with broken windows and walls covered in mold. The front door was merely ajar, as if waiting for visitors. There were no signs of inhabitants for years. I arrived around 9 p.m. alone. My friend, who made the challenge, said he would wait for me in the car, which should have been a warning. With a flashlight in hand and my heart racing, I pushed the door open and entered. The main foyer was spacious, with stairs leading to the second floor and furniture covered in dust. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of the wind blowing through the broken windows. I began to explore the rooms on the ground floor. There was a living room with antique furniture, a kitchen that seemed to have been abandoned mid-meal, and a small office with a desk still intact. It was in the office that I found something strange. There was a notebook on the table, open to a page with dates from over 20 years ago. The words were smudged, but some sentences were still legible. "Do not go out at night," and "It is getting closer." My discomfort grew with each step. As I flipped through the notebook, I heard a sound coming from upstairs. It was a creaking, followed by slow footsteps, as if someone were walking back and forth. Against my better judgment, I decided to climb the stairs. Each step creaked under my feet, and my flashlight flickered in my hands. At the top, there was a hallway with several doors, all ajar. I chose the first door and entered. It was an empty room, with a rusty iron bed and tattered curtains that swayed slightly, even without wind. That was when I heard it again. The footsteps were now coming from the end of the hallway. I exited the room and shone my light toward the sound, but saw nothing. "Is anyone there?" My voice echoed, but silence was the only answer. I decided to open the door at the end of the hallway, despite my growing fear. The room was larger than the others, with a window overlooking the backyard. In the center, there was a chair facing away from me. My flashlight began to flicker, and for a moment I swore I saw something moving behind the chair. "Who is there?" I asked again, but before I could approach, I heard a sound behind me. It was a low, incomprehensible murmur, as if someone was speaking directly into my ear. I turned quickly, but the hallway was empty. When I looked back into the room, the chair was now turned toward the window, as if someone had moved while I was distracted. I decided I had seen enough. I ran out of the house, descending the stairs without looking back. When I reached the car, my friend was pale, pointing at the second-floor window. "Did you see that?" he said, his voice trembling. I looked at the house, and in the window I saw a shadow standing still, watching me. It was impossible to distinguish details, but it was there, motionless. I never went back to that house, and to this day I avoid passing by that road. Some doors should never be opened, and some presences should be left in peace.